I'm
Jack, you're wearing your favorite sweater.
Did you buy it online or did you actually go? Okay.
That'd be funny. Just buy it.
I just got new merch. And I got the new shirt. And on the top it has.
You just find what makes the bottom
Why would I do that? Buy a sweater that says y'all want it because then you just buy
Well, I'm not in Juilliard yet, but I haven't touched it.
I mean, but that's what you're gonna go with. That's a college.
That's like hard to get into.
If you,
That's a 7.42% chance of getting it. It's harder to get in than Yale and Harvard.
Who's the recipient today?
Uh-huh.
What happens when you go to Juilliard?
We go to New York and we see how much we can get done before the whole place is flooded.
Seems like a crap. Still go. Still go.
Bryson is here, Jason is here, Logan.
Yeah.
Sociology is about capitalism.
Amy is here, Brody.
Hey, I'm on the track on Monday.
Grace.
Yeah, me too.
Grace.
There.
Are you Kayla's here, Tyler's here, Zach? Zach's here. Showed up.
yeah.
Such a lot. Ross is here. John's here. Spencer's here. Oh, Roy Durkin. Dallas is here. Sarah Thompson is here. You saw Wicked Dogs? Yes. It was insane. Our recipient of your today is Bryson. Bryson. Wave, Bryson. Just in case anyone doesn't know who Bryson is.
This is Bryson.
That's
Bryson.
She needs our love
12
and
and
support.
13.
Bryson needs all the love and support.
We're gonna make her day.
I'm not really rude today.
You're what?
I'm really rude.
Just say you're gonna be rude.
Just say I am rude today.
Yeah, I did.
I can't be nice.
Already asked her for one.
Really?
Also, if you wanted to buy,
I said I was gonna ask Kayla for her food, and then you're like,
selling it for Stillwater
Christmas present, 'cause I
baseball.
kind of gotta eat it all by myself.
How long does that thing go on for?
Maybe she just doesn't like
I just don't want to give away the blue one. See,
You don't
they
have to
would
give
make
away the blue one.
millions just selling the blue
I don't think you
packages.
would.
Don't they? Don't they?
Or Dum Dums would make millions just selling the blueberry.
Then just buy a hot chocolate
And
and
the
my
cotton
credit
candy.
card. He was like, "Oh, thanks, mom." He just like,
Do you think they purposely put like less blueberries in the packages so that you have to buy more packages to get more blueberries?
Or do you think that they put glass in chapstick so then it's in chapstick? Like, first you buy more chapstick.
Yeah, marketing.
Chapstick never really helps.
My theory proven.
God put some Vaseline on your lips overnight.
This is literally the best
"There's no way."
Vaseline, like petroleum jelly.
I
don't
even know
And you put like fuzzy socks over them, and you sneeze like that, and you wake up and you're like, like actually, like
I need to do that.
No, I wouldn't.
you're like fresh out of the womb soft.
Oh, you're fine.
Fresh out
You know what I'm talking about.
But my hands are the rest of me is dying.
Rest of me is crusty and old. Oregon.
You wasn't here yet.
Or down prep.
Sounds like oregano.
Did oregano. Did that originate from Oregon?
No, because there's an A instead of T.
Wait for the option.
Gas station.
That was much closer this time.
That's for Bryson.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're gonna need more about Nebraska.
Three slides, document analysis, call it a day. How's that?
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
I don't know.
Are we there today? Are we there mentally today?
No.
Yeah, but
No, I'm
the
a
other
little
days
on.
when it's down.
Let's do.
Max time, question mark?
You rock.
I'm acting advisory.
Oh, wait, I need to sign it. Oh.
I introduced this idea yesterday,
Compromise.
and here I am again. California wanted to be admitted as a free state. There's California, it wants to be in as a free state, but this presents a problem. The problem is that would upset the balance, the political balance that exists in the legislature of the US government. We need a hero, man. We need someone who is good at making compromises. I feel like going for a walk. Henry Clay, who earlier in this class had created the Missouri Compromise in the 1830s, is still alive. It is alive! And he works out a compromise called the Great Compromise, or the Compromise of 1850. And that compromise had these parts. Part one, California is in as a free state. Keep score here. Hooray for slavery team and anti-slavery team. California is in as a free state. What's the score?
1-0.
1-0 who?
Not
Just name both teams.
Not slavery.
The not slavery team is ahead 1-0. This one takes a little bit of thinking here, but do you remember when Texas was let in? It didn't look like the Texas that exists today, right? The Texas that was let in is the state of Texas, plus a little bit of Oklahoma, a little bit of Colorado, and a little bit of New Mexico. That was Texas. And it doesn't look like that today. Well, part of the Missouri Compromise was the rezoning of Texas so that it looks like what it looks like today. They took land away from Texas and awarded it to other entities. I guess my question to you is, why? What's the difference? Can you see what the point was?
more states that could be free. No?
You're on to something, or you're on something. But think it through a little bit more. Texas was a slave state, which means who lives there? Slave owners. And now we're taking land away from Texas and making it into New Mexico.
Less need for slaves.
Another slave state.
Another slave state. It's a pro-slavery part. It's now 1-1. You understand? Anyone confused? The people that live here used to be slave owners in Texas, and now they are slave owners in New Mexico, which means you now have 2 slave states, not 1. You're spreading it out. Okay, we get it. We would take the rest of the Mexican cession, right? Mexican cession minus California equals the rest of the Mexican cession. You understand that little math formula I just named? And they would draw a line right through the middle, creating something called Utah and something called New Mexico. Now, these aren't states, these are territories. These are territories. So the Mexican concession would be divided, and what would determine the legality of slavery? Popular sovereignty. In other words, there'd be a vote. Now, who wins that one? It's, well, maybe, I don't know. It depends on the vote. But consider New Mexico has a very good chance of voting for slavery because you have a lot of slave owners that suddenly are New Mexicans, right? So let's call that a tie. Let's call that a Packer-Viking game one, right? Because neither kicker can make a field goal. All right. So it's 1, 1, and 1. One win for the pro-slave, one win for the anti-slave, and one where both sides are like, I don't know, kind of. Let's go with it. Fossil passed. Anyone? Fossil? FSL. Anyone want to take a shot what S is? Slave. That's L. I asked her what S means, and you were right. S means slave. Fugitive. Slave law. A fugitive. What's a fugitive? A runaway, right? A runaway slave. A fugitive slave law is passed. This law said that if there was a slave that escaped to the north via the Underground Railroad and was seen in a free state, that state would be obligated to arrest that person and send them back to the South. Okay? Who's happy with that? Yeah, sure. Pro-slavery. That's a win for the South. That's a win for pro-slave views. So it's now 1, 2, 1. Okay? The slave trade was banned in Washington, D.C. No more slave trade in Washington, D.C. You understand? Okay, what's the score?
Well, that doesn't count, it's not a state.
What did he say?
Parties.
Oh.
If we're just kind of.
Go ahead, Potter, I'm sorry.
Our daily go ahead, Potter, I'm sorry, routine. What's the score? 2-1, right? It's 2-1. True or false? The the Great Compromise banned slavery in Washington, D.C. You with the face. True or false? The Compromise of 1850 banned slavery in Washington, D.C. Wait, before you answer, I'll put a little wager on this.
Yeah.
If he gets it right, I will give everyone in this class 5 free points on the Kias that are due Friday. 5 free points. In other words, if you get 5 wrong, you no longer have 5 wrong. You get a full score. You got 5 freebies. It's on Dominic, but if he gets it wrong, you don't. All right. So it's either a win or nothing situation. There's no loss here, right? So Dominic, don't feel pressured and hated by your fellow classmates if you get this wrong. True. The word out of your mouth, the next word out of your mouth is true or the word false. True or false? The Compromise of 1850 banned slavery in Washington, D.C.
True.
True is wrong. It's wrong. It did not ban slavery. It banned the slave trade.
So
No buying or selling of slaves, but slavery was legal. Slaves helped build the U.S. Capitol. There are pictures of Abraham Lincoln supervising the building of the Capitol building by slaves, which is amazing, isn't it? And again, don't feel bad because none of you lost anything. It's just fine. It's just you didn't get anything.
Lost an opportunity.
Well, I mean, I don't know.
Close the window.
Okay. Last note you're writing down here. This was a repeal of ... There had been a law in existence already that drew a line and said no slavery would be north of that line. But now because of popular sovereignty, the possibility existed that there would be slavery north of that line. So can you fill in the blank? It was a repeal of what? What was repealed?
Slave line.
I'm talking about a previous, very good. It was a repeal of the Missouri Compromise, which the same person had been the author of, right? The same person that wrote up the Missouri Compromise wrote up this one repealed the previous one, okay? Again, if you want to know, the Missouri Compromise had drawn a line, this line right here, the southern border of Missouri, drew a line, and it was supposed to go to the end of the United States, which at the time was here, but now that we won the Mexican Cession, it's now extended all the way to the Pacific, and no slavery would be allowed north of that line. The possibility might be that slavery would be allowed south of that line, but now we're saying, well, maybe the people of Utah will vote for slavery. I think I've said this before, but the southern border of Missouri is also the exact same latitude as the little panhandle line of Oklahoma. And if you're interested in why states are drawn the way they are, you now know the answer for why Oklahoma has that little panhandle. Because the Missouri Compromise line said no slavery would be allowed north of that line, but Texas allowed slavery, so they had to cut part of it off to prevent the allowance of slavery. It then was awarded to Oklahoma. Now you know. Isn't that fascinating? Okay, any questions here? Let's keep rocking. The reaction. This was what happened. What was the reaction? And Northerners said, what a terrible, terrible series of agreements. It was the northern states who rejected this. The state of Massachusetts, Rose'd. How many of you wrote your Blue Book essays arguing that states should or should not be able to repeal federal laws? Okay, and many of you addressed segregation, that if states can nullify federal laws, then southern states could nullify desegregation, and as a result, desegregation wouldn't have happened in the South if we allowed states to nullify federal laws. And that's wrong, because desegregation is wrong, and we shouldn't allow it. It's racist, so states shouldn't be able to nullify federal laws. And I take this and shove it in your face. Oh, yeah? To those of you who say states should not be able to nullify federal laws, well, I guess that means you love slavery, because the fugitive slave law was nullified by the state of Massachusetts. Slave lovers. Not quite right, but okay, you get the idea. Okay, all of this is an example of sectionalism. I could accurately predict how you felt based on where you lived. The North hated it, the South loved it. That's sectionalism. Also, a point of irony: when Massachusetts nullified the Fugitive Slave Act, Southern states said, "You can't do that." What? Right? What? What did you just say? Because before and after, Southern states would do that. Right? Before, Kentucky and Virginia nullified the Sedition Act. Later on, they'd secede. Okay? All right. Questions? Rocking up. I introduced this yesterday, but now let's get into the specific building of it. The building of the railroad. It's coming. The reason that Chicago is the largest city for a very long distance outside of Chicago, I mean, I could draw a circle, it's the largest city in this whole area, is because of the railroad.
How about Denver?
The rail larger than Denver.
Yeah, you're right.
Does that circle include New York?
No, New York is the largest city in the nation. most populated city. New York's number one.
Chicago in the Midwest.
Midwest and even beyond the Midwest.
Extremely people, they're sinking it.
Well, they're not. I don't know.
No one cares about it.
Nobody cared.
The railroad had a northern route, and the northern route was mainly financed by a guy by the name of James J. Hill. Does that name mean anything to anybody in here? James J. Hill? You've probably seen his house, actually. Have any of you been to, are any of you Catholic and as a result have been confirmed Catholic? Any Catholics in here? If you don't want to answer, that's fine.
In confirmation.
Yeah, we're like in
Okay,
the class.
so is a trip to the St. Paul Cathedral in your wheelhouse? Does that happen anymore? They used to. They used to take kids and go to the St. Paul Cathedral. How many of you have seen the St. Paul Cathedral? It's that lovely building in St. Paul.
Saw it the other day.
We drove by it when we went to the U. It was like, hey, look at that shiny building. How many of you been to the St. Paul, the Capitol building? The St. Paul's the capital of Minnesota. They have a big white building. It's the Capitol. How many of you have seen that thing? What's wrong with you people? The Capitol was paid for by James J. Hill, the owner of the Northern Railroad. He also financed the building of the St. Paul Cathedral. He lived right across the street. So next time you're in St. Paul, go visit the cathedral. It's a lovely building. Crashed ice is always there, right? And if you stand on the steps of the cathedral and you're facing the cathedral, now turn around. So now you're facing away from the cathedral. The cathedral's right behind you, and then do this. That house right there, that's the James J. Hill house. It was the first house in Minnesota with indoor plumbing. It was the first house in Minnesota that had flushing toilets. It was the house of the richest man in Minnesota, James J. Hill, the owner of the Northern Railroad. He was a bigwig. He rubbed elbows with Rockefeller. You know, he knew J.P. Morgan. He was one of those people, right? So that he paid for that one. And then we have the Middle Railroad. That's the one that went through the Rockies. That's the one where they hammered the final nail in Utah, the Golden Hammer. Does this sound familiar to anybody?
Yeah.
Right? They met. So they paid one company to build the railroad from Chicago going west. They paid another company starting in California going east, and they would meet, right? And this was Irish labor. So immigrants landed in New York, were hired by that company to build the railroad from Chicago going east. That was Irish labor. And the same railroad path going from California going east was Chinese labor. And they met. And where they met was right about here. Okay. Now, if you're thinking, wow, the Irish work harder than the Chinese. No. The Irish had to go through that incredible challenge known as Nebraska. Okay. I mean, when you're building the railroad in Nebraska, it'd be like, all right, where's a path that we could... Everywhere's a path. Nebraska's flat. You know, they have a saying in Nebraska, if you lose your dog, sleep well that night, get up, put a ladder up, climb it, you'll see him. He'll be like running away for hours. It'll be like, oh, there he is. Fido.
There's mountains.
They have the Rockies. I mean, the Chinese had to blast dynamite holes through mountains, right? Oftentimes it didn't go well, right? So a lot of deaths. So anyway, and then they also had a southern route. You can see the southern route. And look where the southern route goes. It goes through that chunk of land that the United States bought in a separate purchase, the Gadsden Purchase. Okay. To make the railroad profitable, you need people to use the train. That makes sense, doesn't it? Which means we have to organize the territories, make them into states. We got to get people to move there. And thus the creation of a law called the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The Kansas-Nebraska Act affected two territories, Minnesota and Nevada. No! Kansas and Nebraska, right? Kansas and Nebraska. Kansas, Nebraska, part of the Louisiana Purchase. Supposedly, because it was north of the 3630 line, no slavery would be allowed there. But of course, we know that's no longer true. in the Mexican cession, it would no longer be true. But supposedly it's still true in the Louisiana Purchase area because it was the compromise that I showed you on the previous slide affected the Mexican cession land. Popular sovereignty would decide slavery. But
Now.
wow. Uh-huh. Oh, this is Laura Delargin. Hey, I try to text you all the time, and I get a message back like, "Nope, this is a landline. You've been charged." Don't you have a cell phone anymore? Why don't you just text me? Just text me. Can you just text me? All right, bye. That's my boss. Okay, right. I told you the Compromise of 1850 affected the Mexican cession land, but the Missouri Compromise said no slavery north of 3630 in the Louisiana Purchase. And now we have this bill, which did pass, called the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which says, let's let them decide whether or not to have slavery. Let's have popular sovereignty in Kansas and Nebraska, which again takes the Missouri Compromise, throws it in the garbage. Okay. So popular sovereignty would decide slavery's status in the two territories when they would apply for statehood. They would decide by a vote whether or not to go with slavery or not slavery. This throws the Missouri Compromise out the window. This makes Northerners mad because the previous agreement said no slavery, and now we're opening up the possibility of slavery again. They don't like that. So what happens? There's Missouri. I'm sorry, there's Kansas. Okay. All right, Kansas. People move there, and they're about to have a vote. They're going to vote on whether or not to have slavery or not because of popular sovereignty. They're about to have a vote. Let's say you are a nutcase anti-slavery person. I mean, you're off the wall, hate slavery. You're a dedicated abolitionist. Maybe you feel like moving to Kansas. It's lovely there. And why would you move to Kansas? To vote. A whole bunch of anti-slavery people suddenly decided to move to Kansas weeks before the vote. Let's say you were a die-hard pro-slavery person. You would also move to Kansas. In Kansas, there was now two new populations, hardcore anti-slavery and hardcore pro-slavery people in the same area. How do you think that went?
Bad.
Real bad. Real bad. They had the vote. And the pro-slavery people counted the votes and said, yay, we won. And set up their own government with a governor and senators and representatives, the whole thing. And the anti-slavery people, they counted and said, we won. And they set up their own government. One state, two governors, two state capitals. That didn't go well, so they fought it out in a civil war called Bleeding Kansas. It was a pre-Civil War civil war. There were fights. You ever heard of Jesse James? Jesse James. You've never heard of Jesse James?
No.
Oh, young Jesse James was built his reputation as a nutcase pro-slavery person, killed people in Bleeding Kansas. John Brown, does that name ring a bell? John Brown? Oh, we'll meet John. Oh, maybe I've never brought up John Brown. John Brown was a fervent anti-slavery person, almost religiously, not almost, religiously opposed to slavery, so he killed slave owners because slavery is wrong. Hey. So, okay, fine. Are you saying the people that landed at D-Day, are you saying my uncles who killed Nazis are murderers?
Oh my.
They are.
No, they're not. They're patriots who fought and killed Nazis. Okay. We've already got that.
Between kill and murder.
Any questions? Violent shift. Violent shift, sorry. But while the U.S. is fighting itself here, there is the rest of the world to be concerned about.
Why does Britain have a sphere of influence in Tibet?
Yes, a heavy sphere of influence in Tibet. Very good that you kind of recognize what's going on here. So this is Asia. And you are looking at what we today call China, which China today is, without question, the world's second most powerful military entity.
Whoa.
And is on the verge of challenging the U.S. for military supremacy, maybe not globally, but at least in Asia today. But that's an incredible shift from where it was just a little while ago. So this is 1910. So this is about 100 years ago. China was so weak that it was unable to defend itself against major European and Japanese domination within its own country. And what you see here are various pockets of European and Japanese domination over China itself. So you can see the French controlled southern China. And I wish this did color it, but not only did the French control southern China, but the area south of China itself. They called it French Indochina. Very good. Indo means underneath. French Indochina. The French under China, including Vietnam, which leads into the Vietnam War. I'm telling you directly, I am planting the seeds now for a discussion we're going to have in a little while, the Vietnam War. It starts here with the French dominating southern China, the British dominating parts of western China, eastern China, and Hong Kong. Hong Kong, you'll notice, is actually that rust color. It's kind of a blip on its own. The Germans even had a little bit of a play. The Japanese controlling this. Later on, when we talk about World War II, the Japanese in World War II would invade and control this area of China. And the Koreas, even the Russians. Okay, they're carving China up like it's a pie. And each of the dominant powers is looking at China as a foreign area that should be under their control. Do you notice who's not even there? Right, we're not even there. And you might say, well, what about the Chinese themselves? That's adorable. It's sort of like Native Americans in the North American continent, right? Okay. In a series of wars, the British dominated China. They're called the Opium Wars. I mean, this is amazing today. Today, you've got the Mexican drug cartels that are fighting against each other and the Mexican government, and to a certain extent, the American DEA. What the cartels want to do is control exporting drugs to the U.S. Imagine nations doing that. Nations trying to export drugs. And that's exactly what the British did in the Opium Wars in the mid-1800s. Wanted to make Chinese addicted to opium. And when the Chinese government had the audacity to say, hey, we don't want you to do that anymore, the British launched a series of wars to say, oh, we're going to make your people addicted. Because it was very profitable for the British. Almost unthinkable today that something like that would be done. And it's because of these opium wars that the British were able to make large conquests of parts of it. The U.S. does enter this little game. We signed a treaty with the Chinese, the area not under foreign control, called the Treaty of Wanghia, opening up trade, which is delicious because today the Trump administration has concluded that the Chinese engage in unfair trade practices, and so we tax Chinese goods sold here, and now the Chinese have retaliated. They tax American products sold over there, and that's called a trade war. And where did all this start? Right here. It all started right here with the U.S. at least starting to enter the Chinese market. With this treaty, which opened up trade between the U.S. and China, other countries are way ahead of us. They're dominating whole areas of China. We're just starting. So it's between the U.S. and China. Second foreign area, and then we're done as far as note-taking is concerned, is Japan. So right around the same time, the Japanese have never been successfully invaded by any foreign power. For a while. Okay. okay, let me rephrase that, had until World War II never been invaded by a foreign power. The US remains today the only foreign power to ever successfully set foot on Japanese soil against the wishes of the Japanese. And we'll get there with World War II. Where does that start? That starts with a treaty called the Treaty of Kanagawa. Yep. And the United States signed this treaty, basically forcing the Japanese to sign it. His name was Perry, the American admiral who landed with American military boats. Remember, now Japan had never been successfully invaded by any foreign power, which means they were basically cut off. So when the Americans showed up with things like cannons, the Japanese had their impressive shogun swords, right? They were shogun warriors. And the American Navy was like, that's adorable. Here, let's show you what these things can do, and fired the cannons. And the American said, I'll be back in 1 year. I will return in 1 year, not with one boat, but more than one boat. And if you do not agree to open up Japan to American trade, we'll use these cannons against your very impressive. You're exactly right. Okay. And actually, you just answered ahead of the question. You answered the question I was going to ask. I haven't even asked it yet. What did Japan learn?
Do that.
Do that. Exactly. Japan learned, how do you become a great power? Build a huge navy and forcefully invade your neighbors. World War II, it's exactly what the Japanese did. Now, I am not blaming Japanese behavior in World War II on the US, but I am saying that the Japanese had a good history book. Oh, that's what
They
you
got
do.
their ideas.
Maybe. Or maybe reinforce the ideas. Okay, very good. The end. Okay, we've been doing this for a little while. Why don't you take a 2-minute break and get your documents out. We're going to attack a few. Okay? Let's start when the big hand's on the 3. So you got a 2-minute break. Oh, that's for Monday. Do you have this? So let's see. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7. Right?
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7. So six documents. Let's see if we can get through a few.
All of them?
Oh, I saw it.
We have 15 minutes.
Do you have a cheat sheet?
What? Yeah.
So this you can use for the objective and the essay. Okay. So again, do not mark up the documents. If you do, I will give you a new set of documents on testing. Okay. I mean, if you do, that's fine. You'll just get a new. Oh. Okay, let's see if we can get through, I don't know, 2, maybe 3 of these bad boy documents. What's up to you is to find historical examples to support or support and refute each of the arguments being made. Now, I will tell you this, help is on the way as far as finding historical examples. I don't want to overwhelm you, and so you do seem to have a lot on your plate right now. You've got CIS to do, you've got stamp to read. You've got these documents to analyze. You've got a 3-paragraph mini paper due tomorrow on Genovese or however say his name is. So you do seem to have a lot on your plate. So I will tell you this, just hold off on what I just said about, hey, you need to find historical examples. Just wait, okay? I'm putting together something to give to you that will make that easier, okay? So just relax. All right. So who had document 1 as your reading? I was afraid that this might happen. It just happens that everyone else is going to be in the other section, so you're up. All right, so who is our speaker? Who's doing the quoting here? What's that guy's?
Benjamin Boyer.
Benjamin Boyer. And who that?
The Democrat who opposed the bill. He did not like the African Americans being freed from the District of Columbia.
Yes. Okay. So what's going on here is there's a bill being proposed that would help African Americans
Be free.
Be free, right? So let me just read that little intro. In January 1866, soon after the 13th Amendment ended slavery, radical Republicans in Congress began arguing that freedmen should be allowed to vote on equal terms with whites. It's called black suffrage, right? Suffrage means the right to vote. A bill was introduced giving the vote to the freedmen in the District of Columbia, and most Democrats opposed it. So there's no more slavery, but that doesn't mean blacks are equal.
There's no more slavery.
And there's no more slavery, right? And now a bill is proposed. Hey, let's let former slaves vote. And here comes this guy named Benjamin Boyer, and he says that.
It's bad.
And let's skip to the part which I think is the best part. So it says, it is common for the advocates of Negro suffrage means the right to vote, to assume that the color of the Negro is the main obstacle in his admission to political equality. But this is not the complexion of the Negro that degrades him. What degrades him? The Negro is a race by nature inferior in mental caliber.
They're just inferior.
The Negroes are not the equal of white Americans and are not entitled to participate in the government of this country.
It's not their color. It's just that they're not equal.
It's not your skin color. It's just that you're dumb. You're dumb. Black people are
Your mental
dumb,
caliber.
right? So I'm not racist against skin color. They're just dumb.
So they shouldn't vote.
They shouldn't vote. So my question to you, Evie, is this. According to document number 1, did Reconstruction succeed? Was Reconstruction successful?
Well, this says failure.
I know that.
No.
So the answer would be
No.
no, it failed. Why?
Because they're trying to fix equality with slaves, but by them going against them being able to vote, it's not doing anything.
Very good. All right. So to sum up what she kind of blabbered there, and that is this. Reconstruction failed. According to this argument, Reconstruction failed. Why did it fail? Because if Reconstruction is an attempt to fix the inequality that existed, it didn't work. It didn't work. There were continued attitudes that blacks were inferior, that continued even after the Civil War.
Like just because they made the 13th Amendment doesn't mean that people's views will change.
Very good. So, right, just because these people are no longer slaves, do you think that the day after slavery ended, everyone woke up one morning and said, well, blacks are equal? No, Reconstruction did not change attitudes. Okay, so it's a failure. Now, be careful here. You might be thinking like, is it the government's job to change attitudes? And if you're thinking that, I think you are thinking of a good retort, rejecting this argument that is it the government's job to teach us how to think about people? I don't know if you are aware of this or not, but you, as an American, yes, you have the right to free speech and the right to bear arms. You know what else you have the right to? Your racist attitude. Go ahead. Hate Jews. Go ahead. Now, don't act on it in an illegal way. But you can have racist attitudes. You can hate a group of people. This is America. The American government is not the thought police. So I'm allowing for you to come up with maybe a rejection of this argument if you're not quite buying it. Okay? And again, we will be arming you with historical evidence later. I'd rather you focus on Genovese and Stamp and just be comfortable with the argument being made and then worry about historical evidence later. Okay? Any questions on that first argument? We get it? Let's attack one more. And then call it a day. It's been a while. All right, so who had document 2? We have a few? 3. All right, 3. All right. So who's our speaker of document 2? General George Thomas. Okay. So this guy is a military dude. All right. So again, this is after the Civil War is over. So this is a general that fought in the Civil War. This happens to be, you'll learn more about this later, but this happens to be one of the commanders who militarily occupied the South after the Civil War was over. The South lost. The Union Army occupied it, just like the American Army occupied Japan during World War II, after World War II, just like the American Army occupied Germany. The American Army occupied the South for a while during Reconstruction. And this was one of the commanders of that occupying military force. Okay, let me read it, and then let's make some conclusions. With the close of the last and the beginning of the new year, the state of Tennessee was disturbed by the strange operations of a mysterious organization known as the Ku Klux Klan. Its grand purpose being to establish a nucleus around which the adherents of the late rebellion might safely rally. And now my question to you two would go something like this. Was Reconstruction successful? Why not? Because of the creation of the KKK. There you go. Right? The KKK is bad. Now, again, you might think, I think it's great. Okay, super. This is America. You and your racist attitudes, bless you. The KKK did things. They did things, right? The Confederate Army fought their war. They lost. You think those Confederate soldiers put their gun on the rack and said, well, that was a good try? Are you nuts? They put up their Confederate uniform and then picked a nice white robe and continued the fight. But underground. By the way, later on in this class, we'll look at the 2004 American invasion of Iraq. And the American military took apart the Iraqi military in days. You think those Iraqi soldiers put up their Iraqi uniform when that fight was over and said, well, that was a good try? Are you kidding? They put up that uniform and they picked up their ISIS uniform and continued the fight. It's a pattern. When your army loses, you fight underground. Okay? That's what the KKK did. So failure. Failure because racist attitudes were continued, document 1. Failure because of the creation of a terrorist organization, document 2. Okay? Okay, is that enough? That's all. You can shut her down for today. Don't forget 3-paragraph Genovese or good faith attempt with bullets is another alternative. Due tomorrow. I believe I did create the place on Classroom for you to do that. Right? Google Classroom.